My name is Ariel Dawson. I'm 33 years old, and for most of my life, I've worked tirelessly to earn the love of a man who made it painfully clear that I never quite measured up. My father, Dr. Malcolm Dawson, is one of the most respected neuroscientists in the country. To the world, he's a genius. To me, he's a cold fortress I've spent 3 decades trying to climb. Last week, I bought him a car. Not just any car, but a vintage 1964 Aston Martin DB5. His dream car, the same model he used to point out in magazines when I was little. I spent nearly my entire annual bonus to find one in mint condition and have it delivered to Seattle in time for his 70th birthday gala. I convinced myself that maybe, just maybe, this would be the gesture that finally earned me more than his polite nods or thin-lipped half smiles. Maybe this would make him see me, respect me. Maybe this would make me enough. But I wasn't just carrying a set of car keys that night. I was also carrying a sealed envelope in my purse. One I'd debated opening 100 times before that moment. Inside was a truth I wasn't sure I could say out loud. A truth that might explain why, despite all my accomplishments, I'd always felt like a stranger in my own family. Before I tell you how that night changed everything, I need you to understand the weight of what I carried with me. The gift. The envelope. The lifetime of silence. I grew up in a house where expectations were currency. Our home, nestled in an upscale neighborhood just outside Seattle, looked perfect from the outside. Large windows, manicured lawn, the scent of my mother's jasmine always lingering near the porch. But inside, there was only one rule: impress Malcolm Dawson or become invisible. My brother Eli had no trouble mastering that rule. He was brilliant, confident, and followed in our father's footsteps, earning a PhD in neuroscience before 30. He was invited to lectures, panels, and even co-authored 2 papers with Dad. Eli was the heir, the shining legacy, the golden boy. My younger sister Mira was different. She wasn't academic like Eli or technical like me. She was an artist, a free spirit, but she had a charm that disarmed even the harshest judgments. She knew when to be silent, when to laugh at Father's condescending jokes, when to be his favorite without trying too hard. And then there was me, analytical, reserved, driven. I didn't want to be a doctor or an artist. I wanted to understand the systems that governed our world, especially the ones that could break us. I fell in love with artificial intelligence, risk modeling, and decision theory. I became the chief AI risk officer at Spectral Logic, a private think tank specializing in defense-grade algorithmic security. We designed systems that could detect catastrophic failure patterns before they happened, failures that could collapse financial markets or cause AI weapons to misfire. Our work was complex, often controversial, and always on the edge of global importance. And yet, my father had once looked at me over Thanksgiving dinner and said, "It's fascinating how you can make a career out of predicting disasters that haven't even happened yet." I remember smiling through clenched teeth that night, pretending his words didn't sting, pretending they weren't meant to reduce my work to a thought experiment, a footnote beneath his towering legacy. So yes, I bought the car. I told myself it was a celebration, a peace offering, a symbol. But the truth? It was a plea. That evening, as I pulled into the glass-walled museum downtown, where the Dawson Foundation's gala was being held, I parked the Aston Martin under the marquee lighting. I wanted him to see it before anyone else arrived. I wanted him to see what I had done for him. I adjusted my navy satin dress in the rearview mirror, reapplied my lipstick with trembling hands, and stared at my reflection. Confident, polished, perfect. Everything he said I never quite was. The envelope was still in my purse, still sealed, still waiting. And that night, for the first time in my life, so was I. Waiting. Not for approval, but for truth. For a moment that would finally break the silence, no matter what it shattered in return. Growing up in the Dawson household was like living in a controlled experiment. Every emotion was observed, every achievement measured against impossible standards. Our father wasn't the kind to raise his voice. That would have been too human. "No, Doctor." Malcolm Dawson criticized with surgical precision, his words carefully chosen to cut just deep enough to leave scars that wouldn't show. He believed in excellence, and he believed that excellence could only be forged through relentless pressure. But that pressure wasn't applied evenly. For Eli, it was mentorship. For Mira, it was indulgent amusement. For me, it was scrutiny. My earliest memories are filled with the sound of a pen tapping against his notepad as he watched me solve logic puzzles. I was 6. I remember the day I cried because I got one wrong. He looked at me over the rim of his glasses and said, "Crying won't fix your cognition. Think better." By the time I was 12, I had stopped crying altogether. Eli was always the example held up for me. He made straight A's, got into Johns Hopkins early, co-presented research with father before he even graduated. At dinner, they spoke in neurological shorthand, their conversations sailing right over Mira's head and directly through me. But Eli earned his place. He played the part. He never questioned, never pushed back. He became the man our father had always hoped to raise. Mira was a different story. She was softer, more intuitive. When she painted, my father would glance at her work and mutter something about emotional intelligence being underrated. She brought beauty into the house, music, laughter, life. And even though he didn't understand her, he admired her ability to calm the storm when it threatened to break through the pristine walls of our family image. And me? I was the malfunctioning equation, the one with the right answers and the wrong personality. Too cold for art, too stubborn for medicine, too blunt, too intense, too focused. I earned a full scholarship to Caltech and graduated top of my class in computational systems analysis. I got job offers from companies my father respected, but I turned them down. I wanted to prove that I could carve my own path, one he hadn't mapped out for me. When I joined Spectralogic, a tech think tank with contracts from both private and government sectors, he barely blinked. Boo? When I published a white paper that got cited in 2 federal hearings about algorithmic warfare, he didn't even acknowledge it. What he did notice was the one time I was quoted in an article that mentioned doomsday scenarios. He clipped it out, left it on the kitchen counter during a visit home, and wrote, "This is what your career is now?" Across the margin, that was Malcolm Dawson, never overt, never emotional, but always exact. My mother used to defend me, at least when we were alone. She would come into my room late at night after one of his sharper remarks and whisper, "You are brilliant, Ari, just not the kind of brilliant he understands." But over the years, something in her dimmed. Whether it was her health, her exhaustion, or just her resignation to a life lived in the shadow of a genius, I don't know. She became quieter, more reserved. She stopped intervening. She started saying things like, "He means well," and "That's just how your father is." At some point, I stopped expecting her to protect me. I spent most of my adult life trying to outgrow that house, that man, that feeling. I moved to Chicago, poured myself into work, built a reputation, a team, and a name that people respected. Everywhere but home, because at home, I was still the disappointment, the anomaly, the daughter who never quite fit. And deep down, I started to wonder if maybe he was right. Maybe there was something fundamentally wrong with me, something missing. It wasn't until last year, during a routine ancestry test, that I started to question everything. I was curious about my mother's Dutch roots, my father's Scottish lineage, just a fun genetic experiment. But the results came back off. Markers that should have been there weren't. Traits that didn't match either side. I checked again, double-checked. And then the doubt crept in, silent and sharp. I ordered a more extensive test, one that required direct DNA comparison. I told my mother I left my phone charger at the house, stopped by one weekend, and used the opportunity to grab my father's used toothbrush from the upstairs bathroom. I felt sick doing it, but I couldn't not know. The results arrived 3 weeks later. And the moment I saw the words, "No biological relation detected," something inside me fractured, then rearranged. It wasn't just relief or anger. It was confirmation. I hadn't failed him. He was never mine to fail. After the DNA results, the world didn't stop. There were no thunderclaps or collapsing skies. just the quiet, clinical confirmation that I wasn't who I thought I was. And somehow, I still went to work the next day. I still gave a briefing on probabilistic drift in AI language models, still drank my coffee black, still smiled at my assistant like nothing had changed. But inside, something had shifted. Permanently. I had built my entire life trying to impress a man whose blood didn't run through my veins. Every award, every sleepless night, every achievement, it had all been aimed at a moving target that was never mine to hit. I told no one. Not my colleagues, not my mother, not even Mira. The test sat in my purse for weeks, folded, sealed, burning a hole through the lining like a live wire. I started noticing things I hadn't before, subtle differences between me and the rest of the Dawson family. Not just physical traits, though those had always been a little off. My eyes weren't the same shade of gray-blue that everyone else seemed to share. My hair was darker, my features sharper. But it was more than that. The way I approached problems, the way I questioned authority, the way I never found comfort in routine, never felt at home in stillness. I used to think it was just rebellion. That I was the defective model in a family of pristine prototypes. Now I knew better. He must have known, or at least suspected. The coldness, the indifference, the way he looked at me like I was a visitor in his perfectly curated kingdom. It wasn't just disapproval, it was disconnection, a kind of detachment that no child should ever feel from a parent. And yet, I stayed silent. Why? Because some twisted part of me still wanted a different ending, a better one. One where I gave him the car. He looked at me with pride and said the words I had been aching to hear since I was 5 years old. "I'm proud of you." I could have torn the illusion down right then, sent the results to every contact in his professional circle. Let the world know that Malcolm Dawson had raised someone else's child and never acknowledged it. But I didn't want revenge. Not yet. I wanted clarity. That's when I decided to give him the car. A symbolic gesture, yes, but more than that, a test. Not of biology, but of humanity. Could he, even in the face of everything, show me some small piece of real love? I had it delivered early, just before the gala. I arranged it all through a private broker who specialized in collectible vehicles. It took nearly 2 months to find the exact model he'd once mentioned admiring at a conference years ago. British racing green, cream interior, fully restored. When I saw it parked in the delivery bay, I almost cried. Not because of the money, but because of what it represented. I imagined him seeing it, walking around it slowly, noticing the details, maybe even smiling. In my mind, it went perfectly. In real life, it went nothing like that. I arrived at my parents' house the day before the gala under the pretense of dropping off an early birthday gift. My mother was out running errands. I had planned it that way, less chance of distraction. He opened the door with his usual guarded posture. "Ariel, you're early." "I know," I said. "I brought something for your birthday. I wanted to give it to you in private." His brows lifted slightly, skeptical. I handed him a small box. Inside was the key fob. The Aston Martin logo gleamed beneath the light. His first reaction wasn't joy. It was confusion. Then suspicion. Then slowly, something like admiration. But it was muted, measured, already calculating. He stepped outside with me and saw the car. For a brief moment, he was silent. Then came the questions. "What's the mileage? Is this an original engine? You bought this, yourself?" Each one landed like a pinprick, deflating whatever fragile hope I'd carried. "Yes," I said. "I got a promotion. Thought it might be time to do something meaningful with the bonus." He examined the vehicle like it was a thesis proposal, walked around it twice, got in, adjusted the mirrors. "It's excessive," he finally said. "You could have invested that money in a real asset. A car depreciates the moment you drive it." And that was it. He parked it in the garage. Not the driveway, not where guests could see it, not where it might be admired. The garage. Out of sight, just like me. That night, I sat in my hotel room with a glass of wine and stared at the ceiling. Maybe I should have taken the test results out right then. Maybe I should have handed them to him with the keys and said, Here, you didn't love me because you knew I wasn't yours. And now I know too. But I didn't, because part of me still needed to hear it from him. Still wanted to believe that biology didn't matter. That maybe, just maybe, love could exist without blood. I was wrong. The next evening, the Dawson Foundation's gala unfolded exactly the way it did every year. Polished, extravagant, coldly perfect. It was held at the Emerson Gallery, a minimalist glass structure perched above the waterfront in downtown Seattle. Inside, everything gleamed. The marble floors, the silver place settings, the guests' teeth. Ariel Dawson was not the kind of woman who wore vulnerability on her sleeve, but as she adjusted the neckline of her deep sapphire dress in the back seat of her rideshare, her hands trembled anyway. The envelope was still in her clutch, sealed, flattened beneath her phone. She told herself she wouldn't use it, but part of her knew she might. The driver dropped her off right in front of the museum entrance. A red carpet had been rolled out for the occasion, though it wasn't televised. Her father always said public image was an investment. Tonight, he would be surrounded by major donors, former students, journalists from 2 science journals, and a handful of prominent local politicians. And right out front, in the center of a dramatic spotlight display, the Aston Martin. Her father had not parked it in the garage after all. He'd saved it. For the gala. For show. Guests snapped photos as they entered. The vintage car gleamed under the lights like a polished gem. Some guests asked whose it was. "Oh, Dr. Dawson's," one of the volunteers answered. Not a gift from his daughter, just his, as if it had appeared from the sky. Ariel entered the museum with her chin lifted. She had spent enough time in boardrooms to know how to hold composure under fire. But there was a specific burn that came from being invisible in front of people who knew your name. Inside, the hall buzzed with energy. Classical music floated through the air. A server offered her a glass of champagne before she even crossed the entrance. She accepted it with a nod. From across the room, she spotted her mother, Lillian, smiling too brightly, dressed in pale lilac. Mira stood beside her, greeting guests with that effortless warmth Ariel had never been able to mimic. When Mira saw Ariel, her eyes lit up. She made her way over with a gentle smile and wrapped Ariel in a brief hug. "You look incredible," Mira said. "Seriously, show-stopping." "Thanks," Ariel replied softly. "So do you." There was a moment of hesitation. Mira glanced down at Ariel's clutch. "You brought it?" Ariel nodded. "I thought you said you weren't going to." "I said I wasn't sure," Ariel interrupted. "And I'm still not. But I needed to have it." Mira didn't push. She just nodded. "He's been giving tours of the car all night," she said. "To donors, politicians, anyone who'll listen." "Did he mention who gave it to him?" Mira hesitated. "No, of course not." Ariel exhaled slowly. "Thanks for being honest. He's going to make a speech later. You know he always does. It'll be, well, you know how it'll be." Ariel offered a humorless smile. "Of course, the annual sermon." She made her way deeper into the room, weaving through clusters of guests. Some greeted her warmly. Others with vague recognition. Most knew her name, but not much else. Her father never mentioned her accomplishments. She was the silent daughter, the one whose title sounded impressive, but whose presence wasn't celebrated. She spent the next hour sipping champagne, exchanging small talk, and watching from the sidelines. Her brother Eli arrived fashionably late, with his fiancée on his arm. He was surrounded instantly. Guests leaned in to shake his hand, praise his recent publication, and ask about his rumored upcoming keynote at an international neuroscience symposium. Her father greeted him like a returning king, an arm around his back, a full-bodied laugh. When their eyes met across the room, Malcolm gave Ariel a curt nod. No smile, no greeting, just acknowledgement. Barely. She turned away. Her mother eventually found her by the bar and kissed her cheek. "The car is beautiful," Lillian said quietly. "I had no idea you were planning something so grand." "I wanted it to mean something," Ariel said. "To him, to me." Lillian nodded, But her eyes didn't meet her daughter's. There was tension in the line of her jaw, something unspoken. "He's about to speak," she murmured, touching Ariel's arm. "Just be prepared." Ariel tilted her head. "For what?" But her mother didn't answer. She just walked back toward the center of the room, where the crowd was already beginning to gather in a half-circle beneath the central chandelier. The podium had been rolled out. The lights adjusted. A hush began to fall, and Ariel Dawson, daughter of the great Dr. Malcolm Dawson, braced herself for what would come next. The lights dimmed slightly, just enough to create a spotlight over the central platform. The chatter faded into a hush as Dr. Malcolm Dawson stepped forward. He didn't need to tap the microphone or clear his throat. His presence alone was enough to silence a room. He stood tall in his tailored charcoal suit, his silver hair immaculately combed, his expression unreadable, a man who had made a living teaching the world about the mind, and yet never seemed to understand the heart. "Friends, colleagues, honored guests," he began. "Thank you for joining us tonight for the Dawson Foundation's annual gala." His voice was calm, measured, and practiced. The kind of voice that commanded attention in every setting, from classrooms to conference stages to dining rooms where dissent was politely ignored. Ariel stood at the edge of the crowd, champagne glass in hand, gaze steady. "As many of you know," Malcolm continued, "this gala began as a simple family gathering. But over the years, it's grown into something more, something I'm proud of." His eyes scanned the room, landing briefly on Eli, who stood tall near the front, nodding with practiced humility. "This year marks my 70th birthday," Malcolm said with a small smile. "And I've spent much of the past few months reflecting on legacy, on lineage, on what it means to build something that lasts." Ariel felt a chill rise in her chest. He was winding up. "Legacy isn't just about what we build with our hands," he said. "It's about what we pass down. It's about blood and bond and brilliance carried forward." He turned toward Eli. "My son, Eli," Malcolm said, raising his glass, "has done just that. His advancements in neuroplasticity are not only pushing science forward, they're deepening the Dawson legacy. He's built on my work and taken it further. I couldn't be prouder." Applause broke out. Guests turned toward Eli, offering congratulations. Malcolm's gaze shifted next toward Mira. "And Mira, her work with art therapy for veterans has touched lives in ways data alone cannot. She reminds us that healing isn't always found in a lab." Mira offered a gracious smile, though her shoulders had stiffened slightly. Then came the pause, the kind Ariel knew too well, the silence that always preceded her exclusion. She held her breath, waiting. And then it came. "As for my other child," Malcolm said, his tone dropping slightly, "well, not all paths lead forward. Some merely circle back." There was no name, no title, just that vague, surgical jab. "I suppose every family has outliers," he added with a thin smile. "Those who choose to step outside the structure, sometimes for exploration, sometimes for attention, sometimes just to prove they can." A few polite chuckles echoed from the crowd, unsure whether it was humor or insult. Ariel didn't laugh. She felt the room shift, eyes glancing her way, some curious, some embarrassed, others carefully neutral. Her jaw tightened. She didn't flinch, didn't blink. Malcolm raised his glass again. "But I am proud tonight, proud of the work we've done, proud of the children who carry the Dawson name with honor and purpose. Legacy is a gift and a responsibility." He smiled toward Eli and Mira. "And I look forward to seeing that legacy continue." The crowd clapped again, louder this time. Toasts were made. The pianist resumed playing. Waiters moved through with fresh champagne. But Ariel remained still. Beneath the noise, a roar was building inside her. He hadn't just excluded her. He had erased her. Again. No mention of her career, no reference to the car, not even her name. She had spent her life becoming someone that man might finally recognize, and all he saw was an outlier, an afterthought. The envelope in her purse pulsed like a heartbeat. She felt Mira approach her side. "I'm so sorry," Mira whispered. Ariel didn't answer. She stared at her father from across the room. He was laughing now, flanked by donors and researchers, a glass of champagne raised high, basking in the applause that had been built in part by a lie. And maybe it was time to end that lie. Not to shame him, not for revenge, but for truth. Because if he couldn't see her as a daughter, then maybe the world needed to know why. Ariel didn't remember walking toward the stage. It was as if her body moved on its own, steady and certain, guided by something deeper than impulse, by resolve. The crowd hadn't fully settled from Malcolm's toast. Conversations had resumed, laughter had returned. A few heads turned as she passed, sensing something in her stride, in the way she held her clutch to her chest, like it contained something sacred or dangerous. She reached the edge of the stage, paused at the steps, and then climbed them, deliberately, one by one. By the time she stood beside the microphone, the pianist had faltered, the melody fading awkwardly into silence. All eyes turned. Malcolm looked up from his circle of admirers, confusion flickering across his face. Ariel's voice, when it came, was calm, measured. No trembling, no bitterness, just truth. "Thank you for the lovely evening," she began, looking out across the crowd. "I wasn't planning to speak, but I think it's time I did." A ripple moved through the room. Someone near the bar leaned forward. Mira took a step toward the stage, eyes wide. "For those of you who don't know me well," Ariel said, "I'm Ariel Dawson. I'm the Chief Risk Officer for Spectral Logic. Our team designs predictive AI models that help prevent systemic failures in defense systems, infrastructure, finance. I've led projects that have prevented actual catastrophe." She paused, letting the words hang in the air. "But tonight, I'm not here to talk about my work. I'm here because I've spent 33 years trying to understand a system that never made sense. A system inside my own family." Malcolm's expression changed. First confusion, then warning. His mouth opened slightly, but he didn't interrupt. He never interrupted in public. Not yet. "Some of you might have noticed," Ariel continued, "that my father just made a lovely toast. He praised Eli and Mira. But when it came time to mention me, he chose silence. Again." Polite discomfort swept across the crowd. "I've spent most of my life thinking that silence was my fault, that if I worked harder, achieved more, succeeded louder, maybe I'd finally earn a place at his table." Her fingers tightened slightly on the clutch. "But recently, I found out something that explains the distance, the looks, the way he's always held me at arm's length." She pulled the envelope from her bag and held it up. It looked so ordinary, white, unmarked, unassuming. But inside, it contained a truth that had redefined her life. "I had a DNA test done," she said simply. "Out of curiosity, for ancestry, nothing more. But the results surprised me." Malcolm stepped forward now. "Ariel," she held up a hand, he stopped. "This test, and the follow-up with a direct sample, confirmed one thing with complete certainty. Malcolm Dawson is not my biological father." Gasps rose from the crowd. Someone dropped a glass. It shattered quietly in the distance. Ariel didn't flinch. She walked toward the edge of the stage, slowly descended the stairs, and approached her father's table. He stood frozen, face pale, eyes storming with emotion, anger, panic, disbelief. She placed the envelope gently on the table in front of him. "I thought I was broken," she said quietly. "I thought your rejection was something I earned. But it wasn't. You knew. You've always known. And instead of loving me anyway, you chose to punish me for existing." Malcolm's lips moved, but no sound came. Ariel turned to the crowd again. "That car out front, the Aston Martin? I bought it. For him. With my own money. I thought maybe it would mean something, but I see now you can't buy acceptance. And some people are never capable of giving love. Only control." She looked at Mira, then at her mother, whose hand trembled over her wine glass. Lillian's face had gone pale. Ariel's voice softened. "If you loved me, even a little, You could have said something. You could have told me the truth. She turned back toward Malcolm. Happy birthday, Dad. Her voice wrapped around the title like a blade. Then she walked out. No tears, no apology. Just the sound of heels on marble, a room too stunned to move, and a man standing in front of a sealed envelope that had just shattered the foundation of his carefully constructed life. Outside, the air was cold and crisp. The lights from the gallery spilled into the street. Ariel walked straight to the Aston Martin, pulled out the spare key fob, and unlocked the door with a soft chirp. She slid into the driver's seat, started the engine, and drove away from the gala. Away from the building, away from the man who had never been her father, and never tried to be. She didn't look back. Ariel didn't drive far, just far enough to be out of sight. Away from the crowd, the questions, the gaping mouths frozen mid-bite. The Aston Martin hummed beneath her like a live creature. It still smelled faintly of leather and polish, the cabin warm despite the chill outside. She parked near the edge of a waterfront overlook, one of those quiet spots where Seattle's glittering skyline was interrupted only by the ripple of the water and the silence of the hour. She turned off the engine, let her hands fall from the wheel, and exhaled for what felt like the first time in days. For a long while, she just sat there. No music, no movement. The adrenaline began to drain, replaced by a thudding clarity in her chest. She had done it. She had exposed the truth, publicly, definitively. There was no going back now. Her phone buzzed, once, twice. Then it lit up with a stream of notifications. She picked it up and stared at the screen. 9 missed calls, 12 text messages. Mira, Eli, her mother. 2 numbers she didn't recognize. Then Malcolm. The last one was his. No voicemail, no message, just the missed call, like a punctuation mark on everything he'd never said in 33 years. She opened Mira's first. Are you okay? Where are you? Please text me back. Dad lost it. Mom locked herself in the study. Eli's yelling at the staff. Then another. You detonated a bomb, Ari. Everyone's scrambling. But I'm proud of you for finally saying it. Ariel let the phone fall to her lap. She wasn't sure what surprised her more, that Mira understood or that she wasn't angry. The next messages came from her mother. The first was a voicemail, soft, breathless. Sweetheart, I need to see you. Please. It's not what you think. Or maybe it is, but it's not that simple. The second message was just 3 words. He always knew. Ariel's throat tightened. The confirmation wasn't shocking. She'd known in her gut for weeks. But hearing it, or reading it, made it real in a way the test result alone never had. He had known, all those years, every look, every silence, every quiet withdrawal when she tried to hug him as a child. It hadn't been indifference. It had been rejection, deliberate, sustained, cowardly. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was Eli. His tone was different. You made a scene. A public one. Whatever that test says, you humiliated our father tonight. If you think this ends with some grand statement and a dramatic exit, you're mistaken. He's meeting with legal tomorrow. Return the car before this gets worse. She read the text slowly. No questions, no concern, just damage control. She wasn't surprised. Eli had always played the part of protector, of the legacy, not of people. The screen buzzed again, an unknown number. She let it go to voicemail. Then, after a moment of stillness, she picked up her phone and called one person back. Mira! Her sister answered on the first ring. Ari? Her voice was hushed, like she had locked herself in a bathroom or closet to avoid being overheard. I'm fine, Ariel said quietly. Where are you? Somewhere quiet. There was a pause. You really did it. Yes. Do you regret it? Ariel stared out at the water. Not yet. I don't think you will. Silence passed between them. It wasn't uncomfortable. It was full. Mom's not doing well, Mira said eventually. She looks like someone knocked the air out of her. Did she know? She says it happened before she met Dad, a guy she was seeing in college. Julian something. She never told him about you. Dad agreed to marry her anyway, raise you as his own. But he never really did he? No, Ariel said. He didn't. He used it against you, quietly. All these years. I think he wanted to punish both of us. Another silence. Then Mira asked, "Do you know what you're going to do?" Ariel looked down at the key in the ignition. The car, the name, the weight she'd been carrying her entire life. "I don't know," she said honestly. "But for the first time, I think I get to choose." She paused. "Not based on what he wants, or what people expect. Just what I need." "And what's that?" Ariel smiled faintly, the corners of her mouth curling in a way that felt unfamiliar, but right. Truth, freedom, and maybe, just maybe, peace. The call ended quietly. Outside the window, the wind shifted. The city glowed behind her, full of noise and movement and lives continuing forward. But for Ariel Dawson, everything had just begun. Ariel Dawson didn't go home that night. Instead, she checked into a small boutique hotel in Capitol Hill, a place with floor-to-ceiling windows and too many pillows on the bed. She paid in cash, kept her name off the registry, and requested no room service. What she wanted more than anything was stillness. It was the first time in years she'd slept for more than 4 hours without waking up mid-dream. The next morning, she stood in front of the mirror, brushing her teeth slowly, taking in the reflection of someone who had just detonated her past. She looked the same, but lighter, like someone who had stopped carrying something she was never meant to hold. By noon, she sat in the hotel cafe with her laptop open and an untouched mug of coffee growing cold beside her. Her inbox was a mess, meeting reminders from Spectralogic, a note from her team lead asking if she was okay, and another from an executive assistant requesting her presence on a high-priority project call next week. But one message stood out from the rest. Subject: regarding your recent inquiry. From Julian Reyes. Ariel's breath caught. She opened it. "Ariel, I'm not sure how to begin this. Your message was unexpected. I never knew Caroline was pregnant. She never told me. I had no idea you existed. I don't know what role I'm supposed to play in your life now, but I'd like to talk. I'm in New York next month for a robotics conference. If you're open to it, we could meet. Also, I looked you up. You've built something extraordinary. With care, Julian Reyes." She stared at the screen, her eyes locked on those final words. You've built something extraordinary. It wasn't glowing, it wasn't overdone. It was simple. And it was the first time a man tied to her blood had said anything close to pride. Ariel didn't reply right away. She closed the laptop, pressed her palms flat on the table, and let herself sit with the possibility of something new. Not replacement, not fantasy, but truth, a new foundation. Later that afternoon, she drove the Aston Martin to a secure storage facility she'd rented under a temporary account. She left it there, locked and untouched. The car was a relic now, one she no longer needed to cling to. That evening, she met Mira for dinner at a quiet Thai restaurant neither of them had been to before. They talked like sisters who had started over, who had finally moved beyond surface pleasantries and stepped into something real. "He hasn't spoken to anyone since," Mira said over a bowl of curry. "Not even Eli. Mom says he just sits in his study, reading and rereading the test." "I thought he might rage," Ariel said. "But this is better. Silence suits him." "He's calling lawyers," Mira added quietly. "Trying to build some kind of case over the car." Ariel shrugged. "Let him. I'll return it eventually. Or I won't. It's just a car." Mira leaned in. "It was never about the car, was it?" "No," Ariel said. "It was about seeing if he could love something that didn't belong to him. And now I know." They didn't talk about legacy. They didn't talk about bloodlines. They didn't need to. Instead, they talked about their mother. "She was young," Mira said. "Barely 20 when she met Julian. She told me yesterday that he was everything Dad wasn't. Gentle, curious, kind. But their families didn't approve. And when she found out she was pregnant, she panicked. She didn't tell him. She was afraid," Mira said. "And then Dad offered her an out. Said he'd raise the baby, build a future together. But we both know what he really meant was control. Ariel looked down at her plate. She could have told me. She could have protected me. She failed you, Mira said. But maybe she's ready to stop failing. Ariel didn't reply right away. Because forgiveness, she was learning, wasn't instant. It wasn't dramatic. It was slow, earned, layered like healing skin. That night, back in the hotel, Ariel wrote a short reply to Julian. I'd like to meet. New York in a month sounds perfect. Thank you for being open. Ariel. Then she closed her laptop and walked to the window. Seattle shimmered beneath her, light stretching across water and skyline like veins in a living organism. She had been one person yesterday. Another today. And tomorrow? Tomorrow she would begin the rest of her life, not as Malcolm Dawson's shadow, but as Ariel, daughter of truth, builder of her own name. Ariel walked slowly through the morning streets of Seattle, the city alive with a hum she hadn't noticed in years. For the first time, the weight she'd grown used to carrying wasn't there. Her steps weren't driven by expectation, obligation, or the hope of finally hearing the words, I'm proud of you. There was no one left to impress, just herself. The night before had left shockwaves in its wake. She hadn't returned to the hotel immediately after dinner with Mira. Instead, she'd taken a long walk through Volunteer Park, her heels in one hand, phone silenced in the other. No messages from Eli. A few more from her mother. One from Mira. I hope today feels different. Lighter. You earned it. It did feel different. Back in her hotel room, Ariel stood by the window, watching the gray light creep over the sound. The city didn't care who her father was. Neither did the wind or the waves or the people jogging past below. They weren't interested in legacy or bloodlines or who was a real Dawson. And for the first time, neither was she. Lishaye. She pulled out the folder she had brought from Chicago. Inside were final drafts of a proposal she'd been working on for over a year. An independent think tank focused on ethical AI and systems integrity, free from corporate and government interference. A place where her voice wouldn't be filtered through anyone else's approval. Spectral Logic had offered her a promotion. A big one. But now, looking at the paperwork, she realized that wasn't the path she wanted anymore. That job had been her attempt to earn love. Now, she wanted to build something that reflected who she truly was. The next morning, Ariel called the board. She declined the promotion respectfully but firmly. She didn't offer excuses. Just the truth. I'm building something of my own now. Then she called a friend, Marcus, an old colleague who had once said if she ever wanted to start something real, he'd follow her in a heartbeat. Are you serious? He said after a stunned silence. Because I'm in. Full stop. Where do we start? They agreed to meet the following week in Chicago. She would begin pitching investors, assembling a founding team, sketching out the first vision document. She didn't even tell Mira yet. That afternoon, she returned to her mother's house. Not the Dawson estate, but a smaller home near the Arboretum, a place her mother had quietly kept for herself, unknown to most of the family. Lillian looked older than Ariel remembered, but not weaker. Her makeup was minimal, her hair loosely pulled back. For once, she looked like someone who wasn't trying to perform. They sat in the sunroom. No tea, no fanfare. I was scared, Lillian said simply, hands folded in her lap. When I found out I was pregnant, I didn't know who to turn to. My parents threatened to cut me off. Julian had just been offered a position in Germany. Malcolm was present, steady. He said he'd raise you as his own. Ariel looked at her. But he didn't. No. Not really. Lillian's eyes welled. I thought he would. I told myself that he just needed time, but he couldn't look past it. Every time he saw you, he saw someone else's child. And instead of rising above that, he let it fester. You let it fester too, Ariel said quietly. Lillian nodded. I did. I failed you, Ariel. In 1,000 quiet ways. But I want to be better now, if you'll let me. Ariel didn't offer forgiveness. Not then, but she didn't leave either. They sat in silence. It wasn't comfortable, but it was honest. And that was something new. Later that evening, Ariel returned to the hotel and opened her laptop again. Julian had replied, "I'm glad you're open to meeting. I've thought about you every day since your message. I keep wondering what your life has been like. I don't know what kind of father I can be now, but I'd like to know the woman you've become." Ariel stared at the screen, feeling something stir deep in her chest. Not fear, not hope, possibility. She opened a new email draft. "Let's meet when you're in New York. I'll bring the questions. You just bring honesty, Ariel." She clicked send. And just like that, the story she thought had ended with a DNA test and a slammed door began again, on her terms this time. 6 months later, Ariel stood in the middle of a sunlit office in downtown Chicago. The walls were bare, the furniture minimal, but every inch of the space felt like hers. Not inherited, not borrowed, built. The new organization, Vigilant Systems Initiative, was gaining momentum. What started as an idea sketched on a napkin over dinner had grown into a staffed, funded, and fully operating think tank focused on AI risk governance, transparency, and global ethics. Government agencies were calling. So were universities. And the media had begun to take notice. And none of it had anything to do with the Dawson name. In fact, that name had become a ghost, one she no longer needed to wear. She kept a small framed photo on her desk, not of her family, but of the first time she met Julian. They'd sat across from each other in a quiet cafe near Central Park, sipping black coffee and watching each other cautiously, like two people who shared the same rhythm but not the same melody. He'd been kind, careful with his words, but not distant. He hadn't tried to make up for lost time or rewrite history. He just asked questions. What was your childhood like? What do you love about your work? What scares you? And she'd answered, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. He never once tried to call himself Dad. And maybe that's why she'd started calling him Julian with a softness she hadn't expected. A kind of quiet gratitude lived in his name now, not for what he'd done, but for who he was willing to be. They met twice more since then. He sent her articles, book recommendations, old photos of himself at MIT, smiling next to lab equipment in the early 90s. She saw bits of herself in those photos. The same angle of the jaw, the furrow of the brow when he was thinking. It was strange and comforting, a reminder that biology wasn't everything, but it wasn't nothing either. Mira came to visit 2 months ago. She helped unpack boxes in the new office, brought a bottle of wine, and stayed up with Ariel until 2 a.m. watching old science fiction movies they used to sneak behind their parents' backs. Their bond, once distant, had become something unshakable, something chosen. Her mother had written her 3 long letters. The last one had ended with, "I don't know how to make it up to you, but I'll never stop trying. Not as a performance, as your mother." Ariel hadn't written back, not yet, but she kept the letters. And that was a start. As for Malcolm, she'd returned the car, quietly. No letter, no confrontation, just a single act of closure. She parked it at the estate, left the keys in the mailbox, and drove away without looking back. A few days later, a legal envelope had arrived from his lawyers. It contained a 1-page note. Acknowledged, the matter is closed. No signature, no warmth, just finality. She didn't need more. Because by then, she had already realized something far more important. You don't owe loyalty to those who refuse to see you. You don't need permission to rewrite your story. And legacy isn't about inheritance. It's about impact. On the last day of November, Ariel stood by the window of her new office as snow began to fall lightly outside. Her assistant popped in with a message. "Boardroom's ready," she said with a smile. "Your keynote's in 10. Ariel nodded, took a deep breath, and looked at her reflection in the window, just long enough to recognize the woman looking back. She wasn't a disappointment. She wasn't a mistake. She wasn't an outlier. She was proof that truth, even when it breaks everything, can also rebuild something better. She straightened her shoulders, stepped into the boardroom and began her presentation. And as her voice filled the space, not with apology, but with certainty, she knew. She had never needed anyone to give her a legacy. She had always been capable of creating her own.